video where I'm going to be reading you some League of Legends lore. Today I join you not in the evening, but actually in the afternoon. I've got a little bit of time, so I thought I'd record now. I also wanted to try a different time of day. I'm not sure if it'll make any difference, but just trying out some things. Today we're going to be reading Veigar's lore. I am a support main, but if I play mid I'll play Veigar or Ziggs, so that was the two that I read to you so far. Obviously, as well as Lulu, who is my current pick for support. I find that I pick the Yordles more often. They just feel more fun, and reading their stories clearly, they are fun, or meant to be fun. So I'm sure Veigar's story will be just as interesting as last time. Just like with Ziggs' story, we have two parts. There's the lore and then a little story of, I guess, one of Veigar's adventures. So I'll read both parts because they were both very fun to read through. Sorry about the void of light behind me. That's just what happens in the afternoon. I've tried to get rid of it, but I don't want to block out the very rare British sunshine. It's not even that sunny, it's also raining and windy, but this is the best we can get, so I'll take it. So I'll open up the stories and let's get on to it. I already feel excited to read this. It says Veigar, the tiny master of evil, which I love. What a title! The tiny master of evil. Okay, here we go. For most of the peoples of Runeterra, Yordles are not typically something to be feared. Their fabled home of Bandle City is said to be a mysterious spiritual place, filled with odd trinkets and keepsakes gathered from across the material realm. While these curious creatures are often leave to dwell among mortal races for a time, they generally return with fresh tales and new experiences to recount. It is starting to make sense because in the other two stories they spoke about Bandle City as well, and I didn't know that was where they all came from. Yet sadly, there are also those Yordles who lose their way, and among them is the sorcerer Veigar. After the Great Darkened War left the world in ruin many centuries ago, the only light that seemed to shine on Valorant came from the skies above. Scattered survivors looked to the heavens, and their renewed study of ancient celestial magic piqued Veigar's interest. I didn't know that's how you spell it. P-I-Q-U-E-D. Piqued, I guess. Imagining himself already a master of these magical arts, the Yordle joined an order of mages in the Noxie territories, hoping to learn more of their craft. They did nothing to question this eager newcomer, and he taught them to draw hope from the patterns created by the movements of the stars. While many told to rebuild the world, others sought to conquer it. The brutal warlord Mordekaiser and his army swept across the lands, crushing and enslaving any who would oppose his rule, and mages of the order, unskilled in war. They were of little value to his tyrant, looming over them in his accursed battle plate. His keen eye fell upon Veigar, and Mordekaiser recognized the Yordle for what he truly was. He snatched him up in one iron gauntlet and dragged his prize away as the other mages were put to the sword. By the way, I can see the video flickering, so I'm not sure if that's just on my screen or if that'll be recorded, so like just then, I'm sorry if it flickers. It seems to do this sometimes. If it does it a bit more, I'll try and restart it, but we'll see. Okay, where do we get to? Imprisoned in the heart of the warlord's new monolithic fortress, Veigar was forced to turn his magic to darker purposes. Knowing that Yordles were craftier than any of the mortal races, Mordekaiser bound Veigar to the physical plane, preventing him even from escaping to Bandle City. He was not the only captive in that hellish place, but such isolation was the worst and most cruel form of torture for a Yordle. Veigar performed grisly enchantments against his will, some strengthening his master's domination, others simply invoking terror for terror's sake. Indeed, terror was what seemed to fuel his dreadful empire. Miserable beyond imagining, Veigar became a reluctant witness to Mordekaiser's vile deeds, empowering him to nearby immortality. Whether it was over the course of decades or centuries, Veigar never knew, but eventually the Yordle's magic and appearance started to twist in response. Memories of his past faded. Where had he come to Valoran? Where had he come from? Had he known any other life before this? Questions such as these weighed on his fragile mind, like the last flickers of light before an eclipse. When the revenant warlord's own followers conspired against him, the nightmare of his reign was ended. But by this point, Veigar was now recognizable. His eyes blazed, even his voice had become a sneer of malice, fleeing from his ensorcelled cage. The wretched creature had no interest in the wars of succession that inevitably followed. Deep down, he most likely yearned to regain the sense of safety and freedom that all living things crave. And yet, he chose not to turn away from evil, but to embrace it. Clad in armour, befitting a sinister warlock, he vowed to seize respect in the only way he could remember. Through ruthless villainy, inspiring fear in all those who encountered him. He would call down the fury of the stars themselves upon his foes, and trap them in the timeless infinities between moments. And yet, Veigar could not find the same success as his former captor. Certainly the good people of Valoran did learn to fear him to some extent. More often than not, they would find their pasture scorched, or the local baron's mansion razed to its foundations. Sometimes, though, inexplicably, bands of brigands would be driven from their woodland hideouts, or the remains of feral merc wolves found scattered through the town square. And it was difficult to tell whether those were acts of malice or actually reasonably helpful. For all his assumptions of evil or aspirations of evil doing, it seemed Veigar would always come up a tiny bit short. Still, the nefarious Yordle had not abandoned the quest to become the world's most wicked villain. With his diabolical staff in hand, he sees nothing less than to bring all before him to their knees, and revels in the ultimate demise of those who dare to underestimate him. That was a hard read. That was very hard to read at the end. I'm sorry for the camera flickering. I'm really not sure what to do about it, so I guess I'll just have to go with it and see if it's sorted for next time. Hopefully it's not too distracting. Next is the story. Just like with 6, there is a little story, so I'm going to read this one as well. It's called The True and Ghastly Tale of the Beast of Bolham Tower by Amanda Jeffrey. Thunderclouds rolled off the Argent Mountains, promising pyrotechnics but delivering none. From the tower, the advancing mob looked like a child's mismatched toys, all toothpick spears and tiny torches. The figure at the head of the group was tall, with a splash of grey hair and a blade belted to her homespun tunic. Veigar watched as the group started battering the outer gates, incensed by his villainous ways, demanding justice for the terrible acts he had wrought. Finally, he hurried down the stairs to the inner door. There was a mighty crack as the gates gave way, and villagers tumbled into the courtyard. The leader drew her sword and advanced, picking her way between ungainly limbs, waiting for the rest of the group to find their feet and hold the right end of their spears. Squinting through the gap in the door, Veigar giggled with anticipation. The woman's gaze snapped up. Veigar clapped a gauntlet over his mouth, but the jig was up. The farmers tripped over themselves to cower behind their leader's skirts. It was perfect. He stepped back and, barely holding his staff steady, with all his booming laughter, blasted open the door with an explosive ball of purple energy. He strode out to the top of the stone steps as the dust settled. He knew how imposing a figure he must strike, his hat barely clearing the enormous door frame, his iron boots sending up sparks and thunder with every giant step. His gauntlet big enough to crush any fool who might challenge him. That must have been entertaining because Veigar is so tiny, he's so small. Unfortunately, the cowering villagers hadn't looked up yet, and holding an intimidating pose this long was starting to feel forced. He let go of the breath he'd been holding and deflated a little. "The villain," shouted the leader, eventually brandishing her blade in his direction. In the shadow beneath his hat, Veigar grinned. He drew himself up, as intimidating as possible, as the villagers beheld him. Then the shouting and wailing began. He gathered his sinister magic, gaining an inky nimbus and causing violet sparks to leap off spear tips and belt buckles. The leader stumbled back as a serpentine gash of deepest midnight encircled the villagers and exploded upwards in an ensnaring cage of sorcery. "Silence!" Veigar commanded them. He relished every long stride down the steps towards the trapped mob. Around them, humming walls of violet light stretched between claw-like pillars, forming an eldritch hinge. I hope that's right. He stopped barely a sword's length from the leader, glaring at his prisoners through his arcane barrier. "I see the fear in your hearts," he began with a derisive, humorless snort. "You dare march here to challenge my dread rule? I, Veigar, who has yoked the magic of the universe to my will? Veigar, great master of evil, who has defeated countless arcane foes in my quest for ever greater. Curse my fields with rat weevils for 2 seasons you have," an especially cloddish-looking farmer cried out, crimson-faced with fury. Veigar blinked, trying to process this interruption. "Cursed you with what?" And he turned $1 the week for harvest. Oh, I can't do that. outraged Tilla, waggling her finger at the increased befuddled Grey Master of Evil. With that, the banks broke and the villagers began to make all of their grievances heard. Veigar could only catch snippets of the loudest accusations, the majority featuring soured milk and undersized beets. As he shrunk away from the verbal onslaught, the purple barrier flickered and collapsed, but the villagers didn't even notice. They shoved forward, yelling in his face. He felt the stone banister of the stairs on his back. He was surrounded. He tried feebly to respond, his voice losing depth with every word. But I am... They crowded closer, glaring out eye to eye with him rather than looking up. Suddenly, a commanding, older voice rose after the din. Stand down, everyone. But Margaux, M-A-R-G-A-U-X, Margaux, someone began, before the leader's glare withered their objection. The mob retreated, and Veigar found himself alone with her. She seemed more than twice his height at this point, and radiated confidence. He hated her. All right, villain, she spat. You heard our accusations. Do you plead innocence? Veigar felt like he had been slapped. He puffed out his chest, feeling a foot taller. Innocence? Innocence? He turned and began climbing the stairs, gaining height on the crowd. You have the audacity to bring your superstitious bellyachings to my door, then insult me by asking if I deny them? He glared over his shoulder in their direction. I do. I deny every one of them, but I do not dare presume that I claim innocence. You accuse me of evildoing, and I am evil. Since I took the arcane tower from its puny owner, I have burned your fields, I have terrorized your warlords, defeating them so thoroughly that they swore never to return. He took the two last stairs in one great stride, and I have begun my campaign of terror upon neighbouring villainous sorcerers, for none will be permitted to obstruct my path to ultimate magical power. As the skies crackled and magical bolts hurled from the clouds, exploding around the courtyard, Veigar threw his head back and laughed, revealing in the sheer glory of his own evil. These puny mortals would beg forgiveness in the face of his terrible magnificence. When he stopped for breath, the villagers were conferring in a huddle, casting appraising glances in his direction. One of them popped their head up. Did you defeat Vixis the Cruel, the warlord? Of course I did. She failed to exhibit proper deference, and The words trailed off as the group returned to their earnest whispers. Veigar shifted uncomfortably, straining to hear what they were saying. One by one, the mob nodded to each other and turned to face him. They found him coolly admiring the polished gleam of his gauntlet. The leader, Margaux, I'm definitely saying that wrong, stood to the bottom of the steps, awkwardly half bowing and addressing him. Oh, great and mighty sorcerer, wizard, Veigar corrected her. Mighty wizard, the residents of the barely worth bothering with village of Bolam. It's our village, someone helpfully interjected. Margaux sighed. Yes, our village. Well, you see, we've come to our senses and do humbly beg mighty wizard Veigar. It's Veigar. Veigar. V-A-Y. Veigar. But I'm saying Veigar. It's Veigar. Sorry, Veigar. We humbly beg that you spare us and just, keep doing what Well, we'll just go home and you keep doing your reign of terror thing. Live and let terrorize, that's what I say. This has to be some kind of trick. And yes, she went on. Of course, we'll exhibit the proper, deference. Curse your name in the absence, spread tales of your vile rampage. Frank set his cousin down at Gloft, heard a rumour of an evil sorcerer who'd be interested in, destroying them and taking their dread sorceries for my own. Veigar clenched his gauntlet hand, imagining the sweet triumph of crushing an arcane peer in a wizard battle. Margot was watching him carefully. Hopefully, Veigar realised. Finally, after a long pause, he rolled his eyes and flourished his staff. You fools, you thought you could trick me? Veigar, master of evil? Perhaps you hoped I would grant you the mercy of a swift and painless end. Well, I regret to inform you that your lives are simply not worth my time. He laughed. A big booming laugh to match his renewed stature. Take yourselves from my sight, insignificant peasants. Return to Bolam, and pray I do not find you worthy of my attention ever again. The villagers managed a few half-hearted bows or curtsies before shuffling back towards the damaged archway. Margot, I can't say it. Chanced a quick wink at him, then turned to leave. Wait, he thundered. Her hand snapped to the pommel of her sword. With as much indifference as he could master, Veigar edged his way down the steps once more. When do you think I could talk to Frank's cousin about the other sorcerer? That's such a good story. I think that was more interesting than the sixth story. I really enjoyed that. I like the stories because it feels like you can actually get a sense of what they're like in real life. Not that any of this is real, but I think that was such a good story. Well, that was Veigar. I hope you still enjoyed. I'm so sorry about the technical flickering. It's driving me a little bit mad, but that's okay. I'll get it sorted for next time. Thank you very much for watching. I'm happy to have you come along for another story. I hope you found the story worth listening to. If you wanted to hear the other stories I've done Lulu and Six. They're on my channel. I recommend going to see those if you want to see the Yordle journey so far. Hopefully you'll come back for another one. Hopefully next week we can go through another Yordle together. Thank you very much. Goodbye.